Hi everyone, I'm Scott Stokely, and this is going to be a long video, but it's for good reason. I'll explain. So we're driving from Las Vegas to Waco, Texas to get ready for the next event, and there's a video I've wanted to make for probably a year now. And we happened to pass this beautiful location in New Mexico, and I thought, perfect opportunity to knock this one out. So as many of you know, in January of 2020, I released my autobiography, Scott Stokely, Growing Up Disc Golf. And then in the spring of 2021, I released the audio version of this book, read by me. And since then, or even before the audiobook, I was getting lots and lots of questions about writing a book. The process of writing the book, the process of producing an audiobook, how you got published, or did you self-publish? And so many questions were detailed enough that I really get the feeling that they weren't just curiosity. I think a lot of people are maybe thinking of doing something like this and wanted to know what to expect. Should they do it? And I want to share what the experience was like for me. But if I just spend 4 minutes glossing over, I did this and I did this, and then I got a book, it's not going to help anybody. So again, it's going to be a longer video because I'm going to go step by step throughout the entire process. But my goal is that if you're interested in doing something like this, you'll have a really good idea what's going to be expected of you, and then hopefully you decide to do it because it's been super rewarding. So starting with my motivation to write the book, that's important. It honestly started when I was a kid because even when I was little, I was a voracious reader. And I read lots of biographies and autobiographies, among other things. And I always thought to myself that I wanted to live a life that would be worth writing a book about someday. Now, I had no idea if it was going to be because I was famous or because I became infamous, or if it was going to be a happy success story, or if it was going to be a catastrophic, awful failure. Like, I didn't know where my life was going to go, other than it wasn't going to be ordinary. I was going to do something big. And so I always kind of had that in my mind, that I wanted that kind of life. So fast forward to about 20 years ago, this is not my first book. Just real briefly, I did co-author a couple other books. I wrote the first book on disc golf throwing technique. It's out of print. Don't ask me to send you a copy. The reason it's out of print is that even though I feel like it was pretty good for its time, in fact, it was the only thing at the time, like, I've evolved so much as a teacher and have learned so much since that you're far better watching my YouTube videos or coming to my clinics than the book. But I was participated in that process. Mark Sharp, Michael Donato, and Aaron Rath co-authored it with me. And I also, for no reason whatsoever, wrote a book on how to play darts. I should not no reason. The reason I wrote it was because in the early days of the internet, there wasn't a single ebook on how to play darts. And I said, I could make some money writing that book. So Aaron Rath and I wrote the book on how to play darts. I'm sure it was awful because we didn't play darts. But so I participated in 2 books before then. But I'm not an author. So about 4 years ago, I was in Fort Collins, Colorado. Still wanted to write my autobiography, but it's a big project and I never could find the time to do it. And I was fortunate enough to get let go from my software sales job. Now, it might not have seemed fortunate at the time. I was making a 6-figure income working for an amazing company with people I loved. But in hindsight, probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because I had been an entrepreneur and a disc golfer for 25 years at that point. I wasn't qualified to do anything that paid remotely close to that much money other than software sales. And that's only because I got lucky to get this job and I was the top sales rep at a $1 billion software company. So the doors were open. I could sell software at any company I chose. Problem is, I couldn't do it in Fort Collins. There just weren't the companies to do it. I was going to have to work in Denver, which was an hour away. Now that meant an hour commute to and an hour commute from Denver, 5 days every week. Now, I don't mind the drive. I love driving. What I minded was wasting 10 hours every week of my life. So I started thinking immediately, how can I make productive use of this time? And I realized there's a ton of stuff I could do where I wouldn't just be listening to music or listening to some YouTube video, some mind-numbing something or other. But the idea I came up with that I wanted to do was I'm going to write my autobiography. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to find an author who will transcribe what I write or what I say into my phone. I'm going to dictate my life story, give it to someone, and let them write it. And I reached out to Aaron Rath. He's a very good writer. He's got about a dozen books published. He also had worked for me for a couple years, doing a lot of editing for me and writing. He knew how to take my audible words and put them on paper so it sounds like me. He knew me. And I proposed this idea and he thought it was awesome. He thought it sounded like a lot of fun. So my next step was to create an outline, a framework to write the book. And the first thing I did when I started outlining my life was I realized that my life isn't a book. My life is actually 3 books, because I've had 3 distinctly different eras of my life, completely different from each other in so many ways. The first one was basically all disc golf up until 2001, until I was, I think, 31 years old. Then I quit disc golf completely when my daughter was born and spent 13 years working in some exciting fields and making a lot of money, and then had a problem with substance abuse towards the end and got divorced and foreclosed my home and was hanging on by a thread. Then the third period of my life is I found disc golf again in 2014, came back, and it's been a pretty wild journey ever since. But they were 3 separate stories. It wasn't one book. So I decided right away that I was going to write the story of my first 31 years of life, which is basically my first 24 or 25 years in disc golf. So if you've ever tried to go recount the events of your life when you're younger, it's really hard to do, especially years and dates. Unless, of course, your entire career is on the PDGA website, which mine is. So the first thing I did is I went through the PDGA website year by year and went through every tournament that I played, PDGA tournament anyway, my entire life, and just said, did something interesting happen at that tournament? Did something interesting happen here? And if something interesting happened, I made a note of it. Next thing I know, I had an outline of probably 60 different stories from being a professional disc golfer, mostly tournament stories, but 60 stories. Oh, by the way, chronological order, right? I literally had the dates on every one of them. It made it so easy. Thank you, PDGA. Now, it's my autobiography. So my next step was, there's certainly more to me and my life than disc golf. Not a lot more, but there were other things. So I started filling the gap on all the other parts of my life that I felt were interesting to my story. Growing up surrounded by alcoholics, my dad dying, massive legal troubles as a teenager, at least at the teenager level, couple marriages, and divorces, just my life. And I came up with probably 40 more stories. So I ended with like 100 stories. And I said, this is my life. So I proceeded to drive to and from work every day, telling each story one at a time on a separate audio file, exactly the same as if you and I were at dinner and I was saying to you, oh my God, I was at the 85 Wintertime Open. Oh, I got a great story. Let me tell you what happened there. And I sent about 100 stories to Aaron. And I was so excited because I washed my hands and I've now, quote, written my autobiography. Well, I waited a little while and Aaron sent everything back and I read it and I almost cried. It was terrible. Like, it really, really sucked. And not because of him. He took my words, he put them on paper in my voice. He did a fantastic job. It wasn't a book. It was a series of like 100 stories. None of them went together. Could have been 100 different people telling 100 different stories and you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. It wasn't a story. So I called him on the phone and I said, hey man, I'm so sorry. I mean, you did a fantastic job. I really appreciate it. I want to compensate you somehow, but like, I can't release this. This is garbage. Not your fault. It's on me, but this sucks. And he said, Scott, you're 18 months away from publishing your book. Now the work begins. And I was like, wait, what? No, I'm done. I did my part. He's like, no, dude, you're not even close. He said, the first thing you got to do now that you've put it all on paper is you need to go through chapter by chapter and make notes on every single chapter. What you liked, what you didn't like, what you want changed, what you want to get rid of, what you want to add. And then I want another 100 audio files, one for each chapter of the changes you want to make. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, this is part of the process. All right. And I spent several months doing that. Next thing you know, he had another 100 audio tapes for 100 chapters. Now, an interesting thing happened though, because I actually read through it several times at this point. I read through it and then I reread it to make my notes. But I became aware of three things that I wasn't aware of any of these when it started. It was the rereading that made me realize this. The first was my life paralleled disc golf almost exactly. Like the first course went into the ground in 75, 76. I first played in 76. They played disc golf at tournaments or frisbee golf back then before 76. I was alive before I was 7 years old. But really my life kind of started at 7. That's where my memories are. I mean, my memories begin around that age. Disc golf kind of truly started when the course went into the ground at the exact same time. I also realized that when I was a dumb kid and didn't know what the hell I was doing in life, disc golf was a dumb kid. It didn't know what the hell it was doing in life. When I became a rebellious teenager who didn't want to listen to the rules and no one could tell me what to do, and I was kind of pissed off at the world, disc golf was in its Wild West phase. Disc golf was a teenager at the exact same time. It didn't know what the rules were. It was making up the rules as it went along. It didn't want to be told what to do. It was a teenager when I was a teenager. And then as I started to figure myself out, as I got older, disc golf started to figure itself out. And then as I've started to become a professional, disc golf started becoming professional. And that's when I said, this is something. We got something here. These are two parallel stories we could tie together. If only I were an actual author, I could do it. Didn't have a clue how they would actually come together, but I could see that something was there. The second thing I realized was that of the stories not related to disc golf, now that this book especially, because it's partially like a history book through my eyes, most of the stories that weren't related to disc golf didn't fit into the book. Now, if it was just my autobiography, just like every autobiography or memoir, there's a lot of important parts of my life, like the day I lost my virginity. That's part of everyone's memoir. Of course, that's in my autobiography. It doesn't fit into a book about the history of disc golf, clearly. And so I took it out, and I ended up chopping about 3/4 of the stories not related to disc golf out. And the only stories I left in were those stories that were relevant to the main character of the book, this Scott Stokely character you're supposed to be following. If they took place outside of disc golf, but they explained why I was angry, or they explained why maybe the alcoholic relatives led to substance abuse problems, or maybe the legal issues led to me looking up to the right people. But if my stories were related to that character's evolution within the sport of disc golf, they stayed in. So I chopped off probably 25% of my book, just threw it away. The third thing I realized, and I'm sure every real author in the world does this, but I'd never experienced it, is that every time I kept reading through the book, start to finish, I started realizing there were connections to be made between sections. Like I'd be reading about an important person in my life in chapter 50, and then I'd remember, I first mentioned meeting them in chapter 12. If I go back to chapter 12 and I add just one sentence at the end of the chapter, something like, little did I know what an important part they'd play in my life someday. I just tied this chapter with foreshadowing to chapter 50. That's like what a real author does. And I started connecting dots and started putting the pieces together, and it wove itself into an actual story when I started putting all these bridges in. So I sent all the revisions. Aaron sent them back to me. I was so excited because now I have a book, and he sent it back to me, and I read it, and I was completely dejected. It wasn't good. No, actually, I shouldn't say I was completely dejected. I was somewhat dejected because the book wasn't good. But a couple months before that, it absolutely sucked. So I went from suck to not very good. It's a massive improvement. And I told him that, and he said, cool, we got about 6 or 7 rewrites in front of us. You're still a year away. What? Like, no, I did what you told me to do. He's like, no, that's not the process. The art of writing is rewriting. It's a cliche, but I realized what that means. Well, what happened was every single time after this, I didn't send him any more audio tapes. He had written enough of it, most of the content, where I could just go in on my computer and I could actually change the wording of the joke so it works, or I could cut a sentence out or change the ending. But I went through it, I believe, 6 more times. I believe I went through a total of 7 rewrites, and every single time it got better. And on the final read through, the final quote rewrite, I made some grammatical changes, but not one single part of the book did I want to change, content-wise. And that's when I realized I was done. Like, I had my book, and I also realized I believed that it was good. And that's an honest evaluation from someone who spent a year, like, embarrassed at what I'd originally done. And so I said, let's do this. So the way we published is we went to Amazon. They have a great self-publishing program. They print on demand. You don't have to buy 10,000 books in advance and put up the money. You can literally just write a book, follow their guidelines. They'll print it for you, sell it to you, send you money every 3 months. It's a fantastic system. So that's all we did. We just followed the Amazon print on demand. Self-publishing has never been easier. So I released a book. And the first thing that happened was a couple days later, we'd sold a ton of copies. The reviews started coming in on Amazon. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. It was amazing. Except all those people giving me 5-star reviews were people that were in my book. They were my friends. And I wrote about them in my book and told some cool story about them. And what are they going to do? Give me 2 stars? Even if it was awful, I'm getting 5 stars from all my friends. I know I am. So even though I was super grateful for everybody, by the way, it's a bee buzzing my face right now, but we're not editing it out because if I get stung, that's good content. And now it's buzzing you. Get away from me, bee. So I appreciated all of the reviews, but I took it with a grain of salt. But then the reviews from the rest of the disc golf community started coming in. 5 stars, 5 stars, 4 stars, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 5, 5, 5. They were still good, but I had to take that with a grain of salt as well because they're disc golfers reading a history book and a story about disc golf. Of course they're going to like it. If it's mediocre, they're going to love it because it's disc golf content. So appreciated it again, grain of salt. I didn't know if my book was good or not until, and I'm going to jump ahead of the audiobook a little here, but it's more relevant to the print book, is I think about a year later, or 8 months later, or something like that, I don't recall, but later, I got contacted by bookreview.com. Bookreview.com is an international book review website and award ceremony. They actually have like an international award ceremony where people come in from all over the world into Miami, dress up all fancy, and go to their annual book review awards. Like this is the real deal. And they contacted me and asked me to submit a copy of my book. And I was like, yeah, why not? I didn't know if they would like it or not. Really, that was the least important thing. If the disc golfers liked it, that's what mattered to me. But I still thought I'd want to see what they thought. So I submitted my autobiography to Book Review Awards. And basically forgot all about it until they messaged me some number of months later and informed me that I got a silver medal in this international book competition. And just to show you how bizarre this was to me, the author that won the best autobiography was a woman who escaped some communist country. She crawled underneath barbed wire fences and through minefields and, rolled through mud, hid in the trunks of cars. She was smuggled across armed borders before put into a crate in the bottom of a cargo ship across the Atlantic just to find freedom in America for her and her daughter or something like that. Like, that's what won. The silver medal? A kid who grew up playing Frisbee golf. And in fact, what blew my mind, the person writing the review actually said in the review, when I got this book, I really wasn't that excited to read it. I don't know anything about disc golf. And I loved every minute of it. Absolutely loved it. Gave it 5 stars. I mean, got a silver medal based on the review of the reviewer. So it blew my mind because, as an old school disc golfer, especially being accepted for what we do outside the sport, even though it's not as important as being accepted by our friends and the Frisbee family, it's still something we all craved. And so to get that really meant a lot to me. So, cool. My book's actually good. How cool. But now I have to do the audiobook. And I have to do the audiobook because I don't recall the exact stats, but I think audiobooks now outsell print books like 5 to 1 or something like that. In the modern world, people don't have time to sit down in a chair and read a book. I mean, some do, but most don't. Most read their books on the way to work, while they're doing the dishes, while they're practicing putting. I needed an audiobook. And so got out my phone, read the first chapter, and it was the worst thing I'd ever heard in my entire life. And I'm not being modest or humble. It was absolutely god awful. Like, I love to read. I love to speak. I do not have the skill of reading something and making it sound good. Just not something I am good at. So I said, that's cool. I'm going to let someone else read it. And my my first thought was, I wonder if I can get Morgan Freeman to read my book. How cool would that be? Well, obviously that's impossible, but I did my research, and turns out I could actually hire a Morgan Freeman impersonator to read my audiobook for me. And I was thinking this is what I was going to do. And then every single person I talked to said, Scott, it is perfectly acceptable to have somebody else read your book. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Except if it's your audiobook and you're still alive. You have to read your autobiography. You have to read your own autobiography. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm like, I can't. So I just procrastinated because it was really that bad. I wanted to sell 5 times as many books. It was bad. So my girlfriend finally said, look, you just need to practice. Why don't you read your book to me? Just practice. So I grabbed the book, I sat down, I started reading it. I get about 3 sentences in, she said, nope, slow down, start over. I read it again slower. I read a couple more sentences and she said, no, that sentence ended in an exclamation point, but you didn't sound excited at all at that point. You need to bring up the level at that point, but don't talk faster. And basically she just coached me. Probably I would feel it's kind of mind numbing because she didn't just listen to me read the book. She actually stopped me and had me do over. And we made it all the way through the entire book, being coached the entire way. And when I was done, she said, cool, you're not ready yet. Let's start over. Jesus Christ. but I did. I was making recordings of myself every once in a while to check in and realized I was starting to get better at it. Not good, but better. And finally, after multiple readings of my book, coached every step of the way, I recorded chapter 1, and I honestly, objectively gave myself a C-. I don't think I was quite average yet, but it was passable. It was good enough to where I wouldn't be embarrassed by it. Even if it wasn't good, it wasn't the way it was a few months before. So then I had to find a studio to record it for me. And unbelievably, Will McCaskill at the Last Cash podcast He was aware I was looking for this, and he said, why don't you record it in Nashville? I'm an audio engineer. Marcus Rogers has a studio in his house where we can record it. Just get to Nashville. And I said, all right. So we went to Nashville to spend a couple days recording my audiobook. The couple days actually ended up being about a month. Here's what I didn't realize. By the way, the theme of this whole thing is me underestimating how much work this whole thing was. What I didn't realize was when we were sitting in the studio is that my girlfriend, Will, or myself, if any of us didn't like the way a sentence was spoken, any of us could just stop it, we scrap it, and do it over. And as it turned out, there were times when we would spend literally 3 to 4 hours for me to read 5 to 10 pages of the book just to get it right. And after usually about 3 hours, I couldn't read anymore effectively. I mean, I could read out loud, but it just stopped sounding good. So I actually had a ceiling on what my brain would even let me do on the audiobook. But we spent like a month in the studio on almost every single night for several hours until we got it done. And then Will sent it to me, and like, you know where this is going, right? I was heartbroken when I heard myself. It wasn't any worse than it was after I'd been practicing all those months, but it didn't get any better. I think C- is about my ceiling. Like, I stopped improving. After a month, I wasn't any better at the end of the book than I was at the beginning. C- is how good I can read an audiobook. And then Will said, yeah, but Scott, we're several months away from your audiobook being released because now I get to work. And honestly, I rolled my eyes I didn't read it well. How are you going to make this sound good? Here's what he did. And I'm guessing this is how all audiobooks work, but I didn't know this. So the first thing he did is he went through and he got rid of every mouth noise or breath noise, every lip smacking. I don't say a lot of ums, but if he caught any, he got rid of them. But he got rid of any noises I made that wouldn't sound good on an audiobook. The next thing he did was, because especially I don't have experience, I was getting closer and farther away from the microphone. It was subtle, but the volume was going up and down throughout the book. He went in, adjusted the audio levels so everything was the same level. I think the biggest thing he did, and this took the most time, and it's something that we take for granted because we don't even know what the audiobook would have sounded like had someone not done this thing, except I've heard my audiobook without this and I know how it sounds. It's disjointed, it's choppy, it doesn't sound good. What he did is he went through every single sentence of the book and he made sure that the space between sentences was the right length. And then the space between paragraphs was longer and the right length. And the space between chapters was longer. And when he put that together, it created a cadence that you could listen to. And it was good. It was like magic. I listened to it. I cried. Because at this point I am done. I've completed everything I tried to do. I just couldn't believe it, because basically Will did an A+. I had A+ coaching, and I was able to work really hard to get up to C-, which I'm actually proud of on my reading. But 2 A+ and a C-, I give the audiobook an honest to God B+. And the funny part of it all is everybody compliments me on how good I read the book, so I get all the credit. Sorry, Will. So I did it. And these are my takeaways, and I'm also now going to offer some advice. Not from someone who's experienced, but someone who pulled this thing off. So first off, you got to surround yourself with good, supportive people. I had people that are willing to help me and take the time and do the work and be patient and understanding, who were willing to compliment me on my efforts while still calling me on my bullshit when I didn't do a good job. They were honest with me. Really important. I also had a whole bunch of editors who, when I was finished with the book, they went in and they all read the book and edited and gave me feedback, not just on grammar, but also I wanted to have historical accuracy. I still got a couple points wrong, which I so regret. But it was very close to being historically spot on. So super important there. The 2 goals moving forward. Number 1, I want this turned into a movie so bad. I think I have an investor lined up, but not just an investor. I'm trying to find the right production company in the right situation. This is going to be a feature film, and it's going to be a very, very good one. I don't know if it's going to be in 2 years or in 7 years, but it's going to happen. But if you know anybody in the industry, feel free to have them reach out to me. The other thing I'm doing is book number 2, My Empire Strikes Back. The first draft is done. So book 2 is done. Now I'm 18 months away from it being published. But now I know the process and I know what to expect. And it's going to be a ton of work. But I think it's very good. It's very different than this book. It's far less happy. My third book's The Redemption. But in order to have redemption, I needed a second book where things go off the rails pretty badly. But I still think it's going to be a good read. My advice. The biggest advice I can give anyone: write the first draft. Like, once you write the first draft, you'll finish the book because you've done the hardest part. It's taken that first step. Do not ever wait for all your ducks to be in a row. Your ducks will never be in a row. Do not make a 5-year plan. 5-year plans are always 5 years away. Sit down and write something, because this is the best part. It's allowed to suck. In fact, it's going to suck. If your first draft, if you don't think it sucks, my advice would actually be, give it to someone you know is going to be honest with you. They're probably going to tell you it sucks, but that's okay. Get it down on paper. Once you do, revisions are a lot of work, but in almost every measurable way, aside from the amount of time it takes, it is the easiest part. So take the plunge, bite the bullet, whatever cliche you want. If you want to write a book, get that first draft done. Best advice I can give. Thanks, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed this. Oh, and if you do write a book because of this video, please tell me about it. Nothing would make me happier than to hear that this led to one of the final books ever written, because we are the last generation that are going to read books. If I had something to do with that, I would be so happy about it. Thank you.